Hi, I'm Max Keiser. This is the Keiser Report. Yeah, we started the global insurrection against banker occupation. What are you going to do about it? You know, Stacy Herbert, I was thinking that now that you've got the global insurrection against banking occupation and all the subchapters like Occupy Wall Street and Occupy various cities around the world, there needs to be now move to politicize all this. And I'm thinking that why not take all of the Occupy movements around the world and join them with the various global pirate parties around the world. You had the beginning of that movement in the Swedish Pirate Party, and then it quickly spread to countries all over the world. That could be the political wing of the Occupy Wall Street movement. They're on the exact same page, and this would give them representation because the Pirate Party already has representation in countries around the world, and they can use the civil disobedience of abandoning the entire copyright intellectual property system. That is draconian, that is anti-creativity, which is basically part of the casino gulag state emerging. So I believe this could be the next phase. I'm calling for it. What do you think?
Well, it's interesting because the Pirate Party is responding to monopolies and harsh laws which penalize the people, and that's what you see in the financial sector and the political sector, from the wide-scale corruption. Look at in the UK, not only is Tony Blair, not only did he accept £27 million from the Kuwaiti royal family as thanks for invading Iraq, but now Liam Fox, the defense secretary, is like openly handing out deals to cronies that are traveling with him as official companions. Well, another benefit of this, of course, is that a lot of the wealth confiscation schemes and algorithms used by Wall Street are patented wealth confiscation technologies. And if you repealed the patent laws and the copyright laws, that would eliminate Wall Street's ability to use this patented technology to confiscate wealth through high-frequency trading and algorithmic trading. So that would be a way to topple them by eliminating their monopoly position using patented algorithmic trading to confiscate cash from society. Yeah, and due to copyright laws, the government regulators aren't actually able to look at their proprietary theft machines with the HFT. All right, well, we'll follow up on this. Now, speaking of pirates, there's other pirates in the news. Tell me more. Max, that's in this first headline here. Navy rescues Italian cargo ship from pirates. A Royal Navy team freed 23 hostages on a ship hijacked by pirates after picking up a message in a bottle. And it made me think of the Occupy Wall Street protesters, the Tea Party protesters, or at least some of them, that these are like the equivalent of this message in a bottle. I mean, how random that the Royal Navy would happen upon a message in the bottle, come rescue us. And yet openly we're saying, you know, rescue us from the pirates that have hijacked our financial system and are using it against us. Yeah, exactly. And I mean, the pirates are the basis for the UK economy. So Cameron is unfairly prosecuting so-called looters. Pirates are the basis of the Somali economy. So without the pirates, there would be no real estate boom in Kenya and other places. So again, it's doublespeak from the real pirates, that is to say, the banking pirates. But it also made me realize that, of course, even all of these Occupy Wall Street protests, Occupy the Fed protests, Tea Party protests, nobody listens. Like, they just keep on handing the wealth of our nations to these bankers. And even the commander-in-chief of the U.S. will not help. I have this little video here where Jake Tapper asked Barack Obama last week, he asked, why hasn't your Department of Justice done anything against the banker fraudsters, the ones that have stolen the economy, the ones who committed wide-scale subprime fraud? And this is what Barack Obama answered.
On the issue of prosecutions on Wall Street, one of the biggest problems about the collapse of Lehman's and the subsequent financial crisis and the whole subprime lending fiasco is that a lot of that stuff wasn't necessarily illegal, it was just immoral or inappropriate or reckless. Well, this is where Barack Obama is wrong. The banks committed outright fraud. They committed illegal acts of fraudulent inducement, of fraudulent resecuritization, and fraudulent mis-selling. They've committed a whole smorgasbord of fraud.
Barack Obama is completely wrong, and the press is too stupid to ask him specific questions like, well, what about in the case of Bank of America or J.P. Morgan or Goldman Sachs, law number ... where on this date they broke it egregiously. Why did you not prosecute, you shameless punk?
And as William K. Black, former bank regulator, the man responsible for putting over 1,500 bankers behind bars in the 1980s after the savings and loan collapse, said here on the show, the laws were broken, and there are no new laws needed. And in fact, in this clip, Barack Obama then goes on to say, this is why we needed the Dodd-Frank Act. Well, in fact, as William K. Black said, the laws were already there. You're not allowed to commit fraud. There is ample evidence.
Okay, well, if no laws were broken, Barack Obama, then why is it necessary for Congress to pass a law that grants immunity to the banks? Is it because the banks, A, broke the law, or B, committed moral transgressions?
So let's move over to the UK, where the other center of financial fraud, and how the leader of the country there openly states that there are crimes being committed and then does nothing about it. UK banks ran Ponzi schemes before 2008 financial crash, Osborne says. So this is UK Chancellor of the Exchequer, George Osborne. He said that British bank practices before 2008 resembled Ponzi schemes, contributing to the market crash.
Well, he's absolutely right. George Osborne is correct. The banks committed massive fraud. They were part of a Ponzi scheme that crashed. But he's like that joke about the guy who goes to the doctor and says, doctor, my brother thinks he's a chicken. The doctor says, give him these pills. And he says, you don't understand. We need the eggs. Okay, Osborne says, yes, they committed a Ponzi scheme, but we all got rich from the fees. And the fees trickle down to the people. And that's our economic model, fraud.
Well, he suggests it's a human error that caused it. So like those looters in Britain, I think they should just say, well, it's human error that I stole the bottle of water that I'm now serving 60 years in prison for.
Right. Why prosecute randomly looters that stole bottles of water and not prosecute banking looters and blame it on human error? If I see Osborne on the street and I reach into his pocket and I steal his wallet, according to Osborne, that's just part of a Ponzi scheme that was accidental.
So he goes on to say, meaning the bankers who operated the Ponzi schemes, he said they let down their customers, they let down their shareholders, and they let down their country.
Charles Manson let down Sharon Tate when he brutally murdered her. That's the moral equivalency that George Osborne wants us to make here, that it's just a question of the banks letting us down when they viciously stole and raped us repeatedly. Oh, Georgie Porgy.
To their credit, Bloomberg then goes on to say a Ponzi scheme is a fraudulent financial arrangement under which investors are paid high returns from the deposits of subsequent investors. Bernard Madoff was jailed for 150 years in June 2009 for masterminding the largest ever U.S. Ponzi scheme. No UK banks have been prosecuted for running a similar operation.
Look, when Warren Buffett makes an investment in Bank of America, as he did recently, he's engaged in a Ponzi scheme, an outright fraudulent Ponzi scheme where he's using guarantees made to him by the government to make an investment unavailable to the rest of the public.
Well, that's not technically illegal. That's not a Ponzi scheme.
It's insider trading. Well, according to the SEC Securities Act of 1933 and 1934, that qualifies as an illegal insider trade. Okay, according to the Series 7 license that I obtained when I became a stockbroker on Wall Street and had to know this stuff. Okay, he's committing massive fraud. Okay, I mean, but the defense that George Osborne gives these folks is that we need the fraud because that's our business model.
Let's move on to the war that's going on. We've talked about in the beginning of the show about the Occupy Wall Street and Tea Party and Occupy Fed people fighting back against this banker occupation. Here's a tweet from Bill Gross. Gross, class warfare by the 99%? Of course, they're fighting back after 30 years of being shot at.
Well, Bill Gross is correct. I mean, he's just emphasizing what we're saying here. There's a war going on between lawbreakers like the Bank of America, Wall Street, Warren Buffett, and the people being victimized by the laws being broken, and Obama sits back and wonders, where's my next corned beef sandwich, or whatever he thinks about during the course of the day, but it's not about being president of the United States.
But a lot of bankers claim or plead ignorance. They say, oh, it's socialism, it's Marxism, these hippies out there, they want to take what we, the 1%, have so geniusly, through our wealth creation, we've magically turned money printing into wealth. And this is the way they operate.
Yeah, let me interject here. When I worked on Wall Street, we had a term for this. It's called selective amnesia. So anytime you break the law and you go to the compliance officer, you can claim selective amnesia, and as long as you give the compliance officer a big enough Christmas bonus, they ignore you. Okay. Yes, it's convenient to have amnesia when you're breaking the law. That doesn't mean that when Warren Buffett breaks the law, Bank of America breaks the law, Jamie Dimon breaks the law, Lloyd Blankfein breaks the law, just because they have selective amnesia doesn't mean that it absolves them from having broken the law.
Well, like Barack Obama said, it's not necessarily illegal. It is only illegal if the Department of Justice or the Attorney General prosecutes you.
If they remember that their job is to enforce the law. As long as they forget that their job is to enforce the law, then it's not illegal. That's what Obama is saying. I forgot what the law is, therefore it's technically not legal. How is this guy not impeached?
But going back to this final point I have here, Max, because I want to get through this, the bankers are saying that the protesters out there are Marxists. Here's a headline, Brooks Brothers Bolshevism. Michael Sembalest, the chief investment officer of J.P. Morgan Chase, wrote in July of this year in a clients-only newsletter obtained by the Washington Post that profit margins have reached levels not seen in decades, and reductions in wages and benefits explain the majority of the net improvement. Sembalest printed the latter quote in bold-faced lettering. U.S. labor compensation, he explained, is now at a 50-year low relative to both company sales and U.S. GDP.
Right, so they're bragging about disenfranchising all the workers and stealing all their money.
Yeah.
Amongst themselves. But the headline in the Wall Street Journal will be, they'll say, U.S. increases productivity. That's the phrase that they use to cover themselves when they destroy wages and destroy employment in the country. It's a productivity gain, so we should all be proud. As this banker points out, it's a premeditated class massacre that of unprecedented proportion that now is turning out to be killing people in the street in a pogrom of financial fraud. And Obama's twiddling his thumbs, hoping that he gets on TV soon.
Well, you could put the message in the bottle, and the commander-in-chief is not going to rescue you. You have to do it yourself. That's what my message to Occupy Wall Street is.
Well said, well said. All right, Stacy Herbert, thanks for being on the Keiser Report.
Thank you, Max.
Don't go away, much more coming away, so stay right there. Hi, welcome back to the Keiser Report. I'm Max Keiser. Time now to go to New York and talk with Michael W. Hudson, author of The Monster, How a Gang of Predatory Lenders and Wall Street Bankers Fleeced America and Spawned a Global Crisis. Michael W. Hudson, welcome back to the Keiser Report.
Thanks for having me back, Max.
All right, Michael Hudson, in your most recent article, you chronicle what can only be called fraud in the subprime mortgage practices at Countrywide, and yet President Obama said last week that subprime lending was immoral, but not necessarily illegal. Your thoughts?
It's really not in Obama's character to really lay down the gauntlet and say this is criminal conduct, this is fraud. He, as I say, he's very much all about compromise and meeting in the middle. It's interesting because if you go back a generation, during the era of the first President Bush, they had 1,000 FBI agents investigating the savings and loan scandal. There were 1,000 S&L insiders who were convicted of felonies, and a lot of big names, including Charles Keating of Keating 5 and Lincoln Savings and Loan fame, served substantial prison sentences. We haven't seen that now. We don't have a lot of FBI agents on the case, and most of what they're investigating is really low level, really the small fish, loan officers, mortgage brokers, folks like that, rather than trying to look up the chain, up the food chain, and look at the big players who may have had something to do with the fraud that was really endemic in the mortgage market and on Wall Street during the boom.
Right. Well, in the case of the mortgage scandal, it was a case of illegal fraudulent inducement and then illegal fraudulent securitization. So they broke the law. Now you're saying it's not in Obama's character to say that they broke the law. I mean, what does that say about his character other than that he's a weasel?
That's just his personality is
So
not
his
to be
personality
a really
is he
in-your-face
doesn't
kind of guy.
His personality he doesn't like to obey the law. I guess that's his personality.
Right.
He has the personality of a lawbreaker. So that's who we have running a country of lawbreakers. So the people of America voted for one of their own, a law-breaking weasel. Okay. So don't corporate investigators find documentary evidence of fraud at Countrywide? I mean, let's talk about the reality here of the real law-breaking. And did the Department of Justice ever view those documents?
In the summer of 2007, some of the in-house investigators from Countrywide went out and went through the shred bins for a bunch of Countrywide loan offices in and around Boston. And what they found was evidence that persuaded them that workers inside the branches were faking documents. They were cutting and pasting. Literally, they would cut and paste the address from one piece of property onto an appraisal for a completely different piece of property, and presto, suddenly the first piece of property looked like it was more valuable and you could make a bigger loan on it and sell it easier. And that kind of thing happened throughout the mortgage industry. You talk about Ameriquest, which was the biggest subprime mortgage lender during the boom, and the joke there was always among the employees, oh, well, this borrower doesn't qualify, let's send the documents back to the art department, send it back to the lab, and they'll fix it. But what's interesting about the Countrywide case is what happened when the internal gatekeepers, the in-house folks whose job was to find fraud, what happened. And I've talked with a lot of folks, read a lot of lawsuits, and their story is pretty consistent. They did their jobs, they found fraud, they red flagged it, and when that happened, they were marginalized, ignored, harassed, demoted, fired, or some combination of the above, including an executive vice president who was chief of the fraud investigations unit. Eileen Foster was fired shortly after Bank of America took over Countrywide. Bank of America said they fired her for inappropriate, unprofessional conduct, but recently the U.S. Department of Labor found that no, that wasn't the case, that actually they fired her as payback for her investigations that were finding massive fraud at Countrywide and for trying to protect whistleblowers who she believed were being harassed and retaliated against by Countrywide.
All right, now what about the founder and CEO of Angela Mazzillo of Countrywide?
You know, Mazzillo, he was accused by the Securities and Exchange Commission of insider trading and securities fraud. The agency claimed that he had taken north of $140 million in ill-gotten gains out of the company before it was near collapse and had to be bought up by Bank of America. Ultimately, they settled for a substantial sum, $67.5 million. But the key here is that most of that was paid by Bank of America or by Countrywide's insurers. Mazzillo himself paid out of pocket about, I think it was $22.5 million, which by my calculations is 16 cents for every dollar the government claimed that he had taken out in ill-gotten gains.
Okay, keeping on Countrywide. The loans, of course, that were fraudulently induced, they were packaged into securities and sold to Europeans and pension funds. Walk us through this part of the illegality and fraud that nobody in the Obama administration chooses to recognize.
Right, you've got investors all over the world who are suing Countrywide / Bank of America, claiming that not only was Countrywide, defrauding its borrowers, but it was also defrauding the investors by misleading them about the characteristics of the loans that were in the packages of loans that were being sold, and including inflating people's credit scores, inflating their incomes, inflating the values of the homes. All sort of the key characteristics which determine, how much risk there is in this loan.
So now we've got a $20 billion settlement and immunity for the lawbreakers over their mortgage fraud. I'm not sure if it's not illegal why they would need immunity,
But I guess if I forget it real quick, I can be like Obama and pretend it doesn't exist. Huh, I'm Barack Obama. Where am I? Who am I? Where am I? Now, let's see. The $20 billion settlement to immunize the rapists on Wall Street has been concluded. The only matter holding it up now is just how much immunity banks will receive and whether or not New York and California will sign making financial rape legal. Your thoughts?
Yeah, both California and New York are holding out for a tougher deal. Also, Arizona and Nevada are also holding out. And this is very, very interesting that if you go back before, during the boom, while all these bad practices were going on, it was many of the states, not all the states, but many of the states were the ones that were fighting and trying to crack down on these practices, while the federal government often would intervene and step in between the states and a lender that was suspected of bad practices and say, wait a minute, they're federally licensed. This is a national bank, so you keep your hands off. We'll take care of it. But of course, the problem is the feds didn't take care of it. So we're sort of seeing the same scenario where you've got a number of states that are looking to be tougher than the federal government.
Right. Well, this is interesting, of course, because I suppose the federal government, if pushed to the wall and forced to somehow prosecute bankers, I guess based on their recent activity, they'll just start to assassinate Americans willy-nilly who come forward and who protest the amnesia of the White House when it comes to prosecuting bankers. That ought to solve the problem. So what's some of the things you're working on now? Give us a little preview of what you're working on.
You can find my stories on iwatchnews.org. That's the letter iwatchnews.org. And I'm working on a series of stories. I've already had two or three pieces out about Countrywide, but I'm also writing about other companies too, really looking at what happened to people internally who tried to do the right thing. What happened to the whistleblowers who raised questions about fraud? Nobody wrote a memo from on high saying, here's how we're going to commit fraud, here's how we're going to take advantage of our customers and investors. But one way to really assess whether there was a culpability from management is to look at what happened when people reported fraud internally. And as we've said, a lot of folks say that when they did that, they ran into trouble. So that's really the issue I'm digging into, and I'm encouraging more whistleblowers to come forward and more people to talk to me.
Well, we know in the Goldman Sachs case, they admitted, and it's in the record, that they sold, they used a coarse word to describe human defecation to their clients. And they knowingly did this and profited from it. But let's talk about the Occupy Wall Street movement. Is this having an impact, you think? Where do you see this going?
It definitely seemed to be gaining steam. You see it. There are these sort of mini Occupy Wall Streets happening all over the country. If you read about it on Twitter, it's kind of going like a forest fire. So it's very interesting. It's clear that a lot of people out there are distrustful of large institutions, and justifiably so. You have an institution that has lots of power, it has the ability to do lots of good and lots of ill. But what's interesting is, you had the Tea Party movement that really was sort of focusing on the power and dangers of big government, and now we have Occupy Wall Street, which is focusing on the powers and dangers of really big business and the powers on Wall Street and what they can do to harm average Americans.
Michael W. Hudson, so these Occupy Wall Streets are growing in numbers, but they don't seem to have a very well-defined agenda, which I guess is working in their favor because this way it's not easy to defeat them by arguing their points because they have no points. But at some point, they're going to have some kind of agenda. What do you think are 2 or 3 points that they might want to pursue to consolidate their focus of all this grassroots activity?
I don't know if I should be willing to determine, but my guess would be when it really starts to come together and they start getting more specific, they'll be talking about things like too big to fail, i.e. we shouldn't have banks so big that they need to be bailed out by government, or that they have too much influence over the government. I think the key element that sort of ties together what most of the Occupy Wall Street people are talking about is accountability and basic regulations, some rules of the road to make sure that what happened in 2007, 2008, and it continues to happen now, doesn't happen again.
Well, going back to the anti-war movement, of course, you had a martyr with the Kent State murder on the campus of Kent State that seemed to galvanize that generation and got them in gear, and they stopped the war. Now we've got a financial war going. The Wall Street bankers, headed up by Obama, have declared war on America, and whistleblowers have been targeted for death. And this is a populist uprising to try to survive against a corrupt crony banking class that not only makes fraudulent loans to Europeans based on fraudulently induced mortgages, but also creates the food stamp program run by J.P. Morgan, the very same bank, to impoverish the majority of Americans and make money that way. So this is really a program of pogroms. There's no program in history as exquisitely corrupt as the American banking Washington axis. Okay, well, Michael W. Hudson, thanks so much. That's all the time we have. Thanks so much for being on the Keiser Report.
Thanks, Max. I appreciate it.
All right, and that's going to do it for this edition of the Keiser Report with me, Max Keiser, and Stacy Herbert. I want to thank you all for watching, and if you want to send me an email, please do so at keiserreport@rttv.ru. Until next time, this is Max Keiser saying bye, y'all.